everyone, and welcome to another episode of Speak, Film, and Enter, a podcast where we review and rank movies. I'm Nate.
And I'm Adam.
And first thing I got to say is everything was fine yesterday.
Everything was fine yesterday.
Everything was fine yesterday. You notice Dylan's not here. He decided he doesn't like us anymore. So
it's quite fitting, to be honest, for the movie we're doing today.
Yes, just like Brendan Gleeson, Dylan doesn't like us anymore. So he's gone forever.
I mean, we'll invite him back, we'll see if he...
I mean, for this episode,
yeah,
he's not here. But anyway, today we are talking about the new movie from Martin McDonagh, the writer and director of In Bruges, kind of a cult classic.
And Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, specifically mentioning In Bruges because it starred Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, and the whole gang is back for the Banshees of Inisherin. Adam, would you like to tell the people what it's about?
Indeed, I will. The Banshees of Inisherin. Two lifelong friends find themselves at an impasse when one abruptly ends their relationship, with alarming consequences for both of them.
Yeah, this is an interesting movie because there are so many times, I think, when somebody likes to present a movie as like this thing happens and then you just kind of see where it goes. Mm-hmm. And that's usually a little too vague, or like more vague than they're actually being, but people don't like to kind of give away what happens past that. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of times where I think like, well, you can tell people a little, or maybe people need a little bit more than just that thing.
Absolutely.
In this particular case, the movie just opens with Colin Farrell walking to the pub like he does every day. And when he gets there, his best friend, Brendan Gleeson, tells him he doesn't like him anymore and to leave him alone. And Colin Farrell plays Padraig or Padrick.
It's this movie is full of very Celtic names, very supremely
Padrick.
Irish. Let me find it. Yeah,
I think
Padraig,
it's
Padraic, but the first A has an accent.
We're going with Padraig and Colm.
And Colm, Colm,
yeah.
Colm.
Yeah, so Padraig is played by Colin Farrell. Colm is played by Brendan Gleeson. Colm doesn't like Padraig anymore. It's not that he did anything, nothing specific anyway. He just no longer wants to be friends and no longer wants to associate with him whatsoever. And this movie takes place on a small island. It's actually a fictional island called Inisherin off the coast of Ireland, which I believe directly translates to the island of Ireland.
That's what I had read as well.
Yeah. In the 1920s, during the closing weeks or days of the Irish Civil War. So this movie can, in some ways, be read as a bit of a metaphor, allegory for the war itself. I mean, it's there, but I also think you don't really need to know anything about Irish history or the Irish Civil War to understand what's happening here, because it works on a human level as well as on a sort of more metaphorical level.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need to have any background, but because it is also like they do talk about it a handful of times, and they say, like, they mention like, oh, there's guns firing over there, and you're like, oh, it's very easy to draw that parallel. Right. And I think that's definitely intentional that they're paralleling, or they're making this a metaphor of the Irish Civil War. But it's definitely only one piece of the pie in this instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, really, I think what we get into here more than anything else is just kind of this question of how much do you owe to yourself and how much do you owe to those around you who are part of your life, whether friends or family or whatever. So kind of the driving force of this separation that Colm has initiated is that he thinks Padraig is simple and kind of dim-witted, and they just spend all day talking nonsense and doing nothing. And for Padraig, that's kind of the point of existence, is to just be nice and friendly to your friends and your family and those in your community. And that's as high as his ambition goes. And Colm has decided that he wants to leave a larger imprint on the world for when he is gone. And it becomes a little bit about legacy. And he wants to write music that survives beyond him and maybe reaches out into areas where he's never even ventured to.
Mhm.
And this movie, and I mean, I think it's easy to look at this and watch the trailer and think, I don't know, couldn't they just get a beer on Sundays?
Yeah. That's
But purposefully, I think what McDonagh is going for is he grabs the extreme reactions or the extreme decisions that the characters can make and then leads us in those directions.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think so it's meant to kind of question your relationships with your friends and also how much you owe just to yourself if it means alienating some of your friends or maybe severing some friendships that you've had for a while. But it's also meant to almost be, I think by working in the extremes, he gives this movie a sort of biblical feel, like a fable, because there are lengths to which one of the characters goes to in this movie that I think are beyond what any actual person would ever really do.
I would agree with that.
And I don't think it's necessarily, and that's where I think if you just take it all literally, there might be parts of this movie that make you go like, well that doesn't.
Like, not really. Like,
right. And I think he's trying to go beyond that a little bit and to showcase some of the extremes and kind of what these types of decisions can do to people. So I think while it's easy to connect to these characters and put yourself in their shoes and think about the situation that they're going through and how it relates to your own life, there are elements of this that I think are meant to be steeped more in allegory
very much
and
so
fable than to be taken literally.
Yeah, I think that's a large portion of the movie, especially after like the ultimatum is finally thrown down to Podrick from Colm. When he tells Podrick, hey, this is what I'm going to do if you keep talking to me. You're kind of like, all right, well, that's pretty insane, but like, he won't go through with it. And then when things start to happen, you're like, oh, so we're actually getting into like some real like emotions and some real, like, this isn't just about the surface. This is where like the allegory to the war makes a little bit more sense, right? Especially a civil war at that. So it's a lot deeper than it appears at first glance, for sure.
Yeah, and I think those are the types of things that can maybe bother some viewers, kind of the same way where like In Bruges has a cult following, but it gets really dark in some areas, and I think that
yeah, it does.
And that's why some people really like it, but I think that can also turn some people off from what otherwise is just kind of a funny movie about two hitmen hanging out in like a really beautiful, like old
village.
Right. But you know what I mean, though, where there's a surface level of In Bruges that is appealing to like everyone.
Yeah.
And then as they dive deeper into like kind of the depths of their characters and the lengths to which they're willing to go, or kind of the darker sides of themselves, that's where it turns into more of a cult classic rather than something that's for everybody. And I think this movie kind of hits that in some ways as well, being another screenplay from Martin McDonagh. It's interesting where he likes to set these really dark fables in beautiful locations.
Yeah, I mean,
right, Bruges is stunning, and the coast of Ireland here is
gorgeous,
and
like unrivaled.
Right. It almost forces, or it almost prevented me from letting the kind of darkness of the movie seep in, where I think because of the setting and like all just the beautiful like sweaters that everybody is wearing and how cozy the movie feels, anytime it takes another step towards getting like darker and a little more messed up, I think because of what you're looking at, you just feel like, well, it's not really going to go there. I mean, look where they are.
Right? It's going to go, right? Like, we're not in like the most beautiful place. Like, we're not in like say like Costa Rica. You're not in like white sands and warm weather and like all this amazing like paradise. You're in this gorgeous but like a little downtrodden,
right? But it's very scenic, and
like you generally in those areas, people tend to like really care about community and really care about like the environment of having everyone around and big celebrations and that sort of thing, like Celtic heritage and all of that goings on that you've ever thought about. You think like, oh, this tiny little village on this island has got to be all about community and love and blah 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 and your neighbors and all that stuff.
Right, and it kind of is to Podrick.
Yeah.
Right. But we have some other characters who don't quite view it that way. And that's where I think that becomes interesting too, and how these characters are kind of they're all trying to sort of better their lives. But you run into this area where Podrick is satisfied with the way things are because he has very simple ambitions.
Yeah.
Nobody else around him seems very satisfied with the way things are. None of our other three main characters, who are Colin, played by Brendan Gleeson, Colin Farrell's or Podrick's sister, Siobhan, played by Kerry Condon, and then Dominic, played by Barry Keoghan, another just weird little dude who, like,
but
he's
like
always...
another role for him that just like fits perfectly. You're just
For
like,
sure.
of course you're that character, but that's a weird character.
And he's an interesting, but so yeah, I mean, you have Calm, who kind of wants to write music, and then Siobhan, who's caring for her brother, but you can tell something has kind of happened to her at some point, because she's friendly and smart and beautiful, and you're kind of like, how is she stuck just living with her brother on this little island?
Yeah, like,
and
how did it never happen for her?
Yeah, how did she never find anybody or find a way to get away from here? And she's sort of balancing her responsibilities. I think she's a more straightforward look at the themes of this movie than kind of the relationship between... Basically, I think the relationship between Podrick and Calm, you got two characters with extremes there. Both of those extremes kind of exist within Siobhan.
Yeah, she's kind of the middle point, and she kind of has to decide or figure out not where the story is going to end, but where does her story go?
Yeah.
Like, if you're just stuck doing one of these things, like, you're kind of stuck in limbo anyway, which is basically what Inisherin is. No one ever really leaves. Everyone's just there, and they probably won't leave because they're all so invested in their little community, and they all have their own roles and that sort of thing. She's just, I can't stay here. I can't, quote unquote, like, to say, like, I can't die here. Like, I can't just continue living in purgatory or in this limbo status. I need to do something else. And what is it? And who knows? But,
and I think the more I think about it, she seems like the main character of this to me. And I didn't really pick up on that until after seeing the movie and thinking about it, and even just talking about it now, where I think, because we talk about how she's in the middle, and I think for her, it's kind of going in one direction or the other between the extremes of Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell. And you mentioned kind of the, like, you don't want to die there. There's another character in this movie played by, God, who is she? Played by Sheila Flitton, named Mrs. McCormick, who is basically, like, there aren't banshees in this movie, but she basically is one.
She's just the old lady who gossips and tells everyone they're gonna die.
Yeah, but she does it while, like, dressed like death itself.
Yeah, dressed like Miss Havisham from fucking Great Expectations. Like,
yeah, I mean, she could be walking around with a scythe, and it would fit right in with, like, the way, with her demeanor,
with
the
her
way
whole
she
get
presents
up.
herself. She's the one who, like, predicts that, like, my bones tell me there will be a couple death, like, deaths on this island, and you're like, okay, and you know, Siobhan, like, when we kind of encounter Mrs. McCormick first, we sort of learn that she's constantly trying to duck that woman.
Yeah, she'll, like, hide behind walls.
Like, totally. Yeah, but she's kind of, you know, I like the way that her character interacts or doesn't, or attempts to not interact with Mrs. McCormick.
Just avoidance.
Yeah, it's just a very interesting thing that's, like, character that's in the movie. And I don't know necessarily if she needed to be there. It's another one of those areas where I think McDonagh falls more into fable than into, like, real character. Like, his stories don't quite fit in the real world.
Yeah. I think having Siobhan be afraid of Miss McCormick, right? That's Miss McCormick.
Yeah.
Okay. Is just kind of Mrs. McCormick, excuse me.
Yes.
Because she's being pulled in one direction and the other. Like, do I leave? Do I stay? Whatever her life path is going to be. At the end, there's always just Miss McCormick. There's always just death, just kind of, like, hanging out, waving in the background, like, hey, you got to do something because I'm still going to be here. Like, you know what I mean? And that's kind of the driving force of what Colm decides to do anyway. That's kind of the driving force of what makes Siobhan have to do something, and it kind of is what happens with Podrick's character. There's an element to him that, like, he knows it's there, but he's content with the way things are. You know what I mean? So it's always just that overarching, like, banner of blackness, sadness, whatever you want to call it.
He
Depression.
almost seems like he's kind of been the one person who's been able to not ever think about existence or death. And you run into like almost a little bit of existentialism here, or like how much happier he is to just keep things simple. And there's an element of that, although like he's not really, because Barry Keoghan's character is Dominic, is a very sad character. But he has little bits of, he's the simplest character as well. And but he has these little lines, like he has these little bits of wisdom in a way that not intentional, but he's so much more straightforward than everybody else, that he just kind of says things, unless they're about him. He's a little cagey about what's going on with himself, but he just observes and blurts out truths without being like sort of playing that gossipy sort of game that everybody else plays. And I find the addition of his character fascinating as well, especially in how he relates to Colin Farrell's character. Is kind of, that's primarily where I keep forgetting his name. Dominic, Jesus.
Yeah.
Where Dominic's character falls in is kind of Podrick starts hanging out with him a little bit once Colin has told him to fuck off or feck off. Basically.
Yeah, feck off is said a lot.
Yeah. We should get into, I mean, we're at, about a little over 15 minutes here. We haven't talked about, this is a comedy, and it's really funny.
It's again, when you watch Three Billboards, or you watch In Bruges, I think is funnier than Three Billboards.
For
I
sure.
think the subject matter is different and therefore funnier. But both movies have their bit of like, ooh, you can't say that, but like, fuck, that was really funny. Like,
yeah, for sure. Like the characters and the situations kind of push them. Like, it's very dark humor.
Yeah, someone says something they shouldn't be saying, but like everyone's like, that's a zinger, you got him. Like,
yeah, even if the entire room in the movie is like in shock and nobody's speaking, the audience is kind of that way too. And there's this little sort of looking around like, can we laugh at this? Because I think it's
exactly
funny.
Like, is this
like, I think it's funny. Do you think it's funny?
Yeah.
And then there are, of course, just some instant laugh out loud lines. It's a funny movie, and the acting, I think, is fantastic. It looks great. It's just it's got that little bit of McDonagh. It's not supernatural, but stuff that just leans in, like pulls you out of our world a little bit and gets a little darker.
And definitely puts you in a parallel.
Yeah, for sure. It does. It almost feels like you're watching something in a parallel, almost like mimicked version of Earth in his movies.
Yeah, well, especially with Inisherin being a fake place, like,
right.
It definitely sets the stage there. I think again, to talk about some of the humor, like it's a lot of understated stuff too. So like, it's not very overt jokes, but it's like a comment here, a comment there. Yeah, that like you just have to look at and go like, is that just how we communicate here? Like, what's happening? Like,
right.
No, I think definitely it's a little supernatural is the wrong word. Fantastical is, I guess, the word I'll use.
And or surreal at times.
Yeah, that's a better word. That's a much better word. Surreal.
Yeah, especially with that old crone just walking around predicting deaths
with her big stick. Like,
yeah, she's something else.
So where do you want to go from here? What do you want to talk about? Performances? Do you just want to get to the stars?
I mean, last thing we can do, I do think this movie will get a couple of acting performances.
Like, I think nominations, you mean?
I think Colin Farrell and Kerry Condon will get nominated.
Yeah.
Just a guess, but I think you're going to see a few. It's going to get a best screenplay.
I think deservedly so.
Best screenplay nomination for sure. I think maybe costumes.
Yeah. I mean, it's always hard when I feel like you have to fight. There's always some movies that come out that are very like old school.
Like the costume dramas.
Yeah, like where you're like, oh, it's ancient, or not ancient, it's medieval Europe, and the King of England is, and you're like, oh, these ornate things going on, and everyone's wearing 18 layers and stuff. This is just like, we're
Right.
wearing a waistcoat and a sweater, and like, but it's very like period appropriate, and it's very, you know
Right.
what I mean? It's very well
Yeah,
done.
for sure. I know what you mean. Yeah, I could see it getting that, but I think this movie's going to get like 3 or 4 nominations, I would guess. Like
Yeah.
writing, a few acting nominations, and yeah, maybe something else, some other random thing in there.
Yeah, I didn't
Maybe
really
a
notice.
directing.
Yeah, directing maybe. I didn't really notice any like the music being like especially great. I mean, it's good.
I like
But
the
it's
score quite a bit.
the beginning score, like walking into the pub and walking out of the pub. I mean, or walking towards the end of the movie. That's echoed the same way, and I think that was very well done. But I don't notice a lot of scores or a lot of music in movies. I'm kind of too focused on what's happening on screen and trying to make sense of it in order to really pay
Right.
attention. The
I like the
emotions
score
are
in this.
there, but I just don't remember
Right.
that it's happening.
I like the score in this quite a bit. So I mean, I'm going to guess then screenplay, Kerry Condon, Colin Farrell, and score. I'm gonna
Okay,
get,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
I think it's gonna
well,
get, yeah, I think it'll get like somewhere between 2 and 4
okay.
nominations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd be pretty upset if there was no adapt or screenplay for sure. But the other ones, we'll see.
Yeah.
With that said, you want to just get to the stars?
Yeah, we will get to the stars in just a moment here. If I can, there we do that, and then we'll be back in just a moment with our star rating. Okay. I've gone first, or I went first last time, I think. So how about you go first this time?
Yeah, I was actually going to volunteer to go first. Where is my star rating? There we go.
I got it for you.
Yeah, okay. I am giving this a 4 out of 5. I thoroughly loved it.
Table slapping 4 out of 5.
Table slapping 4 out of 5. I actually want to give this a higher score, but I want to see it again before I do that.
Yeah.
It's one of those movies that I got done with and I was like, I gotta see this again. Like immediately. Like it was there's so much going on, and it depending on like who you feel more close to, or who you feel more I guess isn't right, because there's not really a right character and a wrong character, but who you identify with kind of changes throughout the movie, and then like where you feel yourself, like where you would land in a situation like that, and then trying to see it from the other person's perspective. There's a lot of those emotions and thoughts like happening simultaneously throughout the entire thing that I'd like to just focus a little bit more and worry less about where it goes and understand why it goes. Because there's a ton of like we said, metaphor and stuff in here, and just being able to break that down and make it make a lot of sense to yourself, I think requires repeated viewings here. Acting is fantastic. I can't wait to see it again. I'm going to tell a lot of people about it, although I know not a lot of people are probably going to enjoy it as much. I think you really got to be in a mood for this movie. Because whereas In Bruges is like dark and fun, and Three Billboards is a little bit dark and like less fun, this is kind of just like dark all the way through and not ever really that bright. Although I mean, there is comedy in it. The comedy is good, but it doesn't really like lift the overall tone of the movie to me because of what's happening on screen to one character. It just feels a little like, Jesus, we just keep diving down into the depths of this.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think I'd be more likely. I think this has a wider appeal than In Bruges does.
You think so?
I think it does, just because In Bruges has the whole like hitman thing with, I don't know, In Bruges
it being like a action-ish movie almost.
A little bit, yeah, that's right. I mean, I think In Bruges definitely has that cult classic status, but I think if I were going to recommend like one of these two to my parents, I'd recommend Banshees.
If we're going with people who are familiar with like theater and cinephiles and stuff like that, absolutely Banshees of Inisherin. I think In Bruges is a more popular. I think more people are going to find that to be a likable movie than more people would find this. But with the caveat of being, if you're looking at like cinephiles or people who really care about movies or are like just interested in Colin Farrell's career, Brendan Gleeson's career at all, like this, I would suggest this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think they're both really good. So that will lead right into mine. And we're going to be in agreement again here. 4 stars for me as well for the Banshees of Inisherin. I mean, it's really funny. It's got phenomenal acting, and it asks a lot of interesting questions, and it poses them in, I think, very interesting ways. Just kind of some of the the levels, the extremes to which it goes, I'm not sure how I totally feel about all of them.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's basically all that's holding it back from maybe like a 4.5. But it is a movie that I feel like I want to own this movie. It feels like something that will just be very rewatchable.
It's a question I want to ask
Given
myself a
how
lot.
great the dialogue and the acting is, and like, so this feels like the movie to me, the type of movie to me too, that will get funnier upon repeated viewings.
Yeah, for sure.
As you get to know the
For
characters a little bit better and just kind of live with them like over and over. And then just even little ways that they react to things or the way they talk to each other. Like I can see this getting funnier basically every time I watch it. So definitely something I want to see again. Really, really good. It's in my top 10 of the year so far. We'll see if it can hold on. Maybe I'll go see it again and it'll go up. Who knows? But definitely going to be recommending the Banshees of Inisherin to a lot of people. I think it's one of the best movies of the year, and it'll definitely get it. Oh, yeah. Best Picture nomination also. Did I not even think to say that?
Yeah, we didn't say that, but I think so.
So between 2 and 5, I'm guaranteed almost Best Picture nomination.
Yeah, I'm really high on this movie. I didn't necessarily love certain aspects of where it goes again.
Yeah.
With what you're mentioning, but the way in which they handled or they navigated kind of around those things or through those things, I think were very good. And to your point of this is an infinitely rewatchable movie, I think the question that it asks from one character to the other is something you're going to ask yourself, and then you're going to ask yourself like, why is he asking that question, and then you're going to answer like, how do we get to why he is asking that question. There's a lot of like introspection on your own behalf, and like, am I boring, and like, am I dull, like that kind of stuff
Right.
that like will just continue to like plague you throughout your life, whether or not you're interesting or not. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
there's just so many levels to go through that I think every time you watch it, you're going to get something else out of it.
for sure. Also, lastly, I want to say just Colin Farrell's rant / monologue about niceness. One of my favorite things of the entire year.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
stunning.
Absolutely. So go check it out. That was the Banshees of Inisherin, and I think I've got the wrap.
You do.
All right. So now, all alone or not, you got to walk ahead. The thing to remember is if we're all alone, then we're all together in that too.